Club, and tonight, good, good job. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Kane. I'm with the Lower Columbia Canoe Club, and we're hosting tonight's talk, the fourth in a series of 5 talks on river safety. Tonight's talk is on the concept of winter boating and things that you'll need and want to keep in mind when you're getting out in, more chilly temperatures. If you missed the first 3 talks that were fantastic, we'll put a note in the chat. You can access the recordings on the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's
You're
website.
not going to need to rush into dinner tonight.
And we have also been hosting a series of talks that are, they touch on safety, but they don't have a specific safety focus. Talks that we call takeout talks about more general paddling topics. The next takeout talk is coming up on Tuesday the 22nd, and it is one that I want every single person on this call and any of the other Zooms that the club has ever hosted over the last 2 years. I want to see every single one of you on the Tuesday night call. It's the topic is diversifying paddle sports. We've got 2 phenomenal speakers, Adam Edwards and Antoinette Lee Toscano, 2 paddlers of color who should not be shouldering the burden of diversifying paddle sports all on their own. They'll talk to us about some of the strategies that they've seen that are working, and they will give us some very specific, tangible steps that we can take if we would like to make sure that there is a wider variety and diversity of folks enjoying the river alongside us. So that's on Tuesday next week. You'll get an email about it if you're a club member, and if you have heard about the club because of Facebook, you will not be able to avoid the Facebook posting about next week's talk. With that, I want to turn it over to my friend and my colleague and my fellow board member, Teresa Gryder. Teresa is the safety chair of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club and is responsible for all of the talks in the safety series alongside her panel of fantastic expert panelists. And Teresa will introduce you to tonight's speakers. She'll get the talk started. And I, unfortunately, am not able to hang out for the entire talk tonight. So my colleague, Will Gare, who is the conservation chair of the Lower Columbia Canoe Club, hopefully will help Teresa keep everything on track. And if I don't see you for the rest of the evening, I'll see you on the river. All right, Teresa, to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited. We actually have people turning out to talk about cold. I think I might have misnamed it a little bit when I called it winter paddling at first, because cold water is an important factor that we will be talking about, even when the air is not cold and it's not winter. So really, we're talking about cold. And with me tonight, I have 3 of my friends and fellow paddlers who I've met along the way through life. I'd say the one I have known the longest is this character, Dan House, who used to be a raft guide along with me on a bunch of rivers in the Southeast. You want to say anything to introduce yourself, Dan?
I'm not sure what else to say. I've been paddling since I was a wee little tot, whitewater with my grandmother and my mother, and teaching canoeing and kayaking, and now I'm up in Maine, and so cold paddling is a standard for me.
Right.
In addition to guiding pretty nearly everywhere from Costa Rica to Fairbanks. So.
Okay, that counts for something. And that's the first mention of Alaska, but we got a lot of Alaska today, because the next, I'm going chronologically in my life, the next one of you 3 that I met is Susan Sherman. She's in the green hat. Say hi, Susan. She's a pilot and a paddler and a mountain biker and an all-around outdoors woman. And currently living in Alaska, but when I met her, she was living in the Portland area. So that's how that connection happened. And what would you like to say?
Yeah, I met Teresa. I think she had just moved to Portland area, and we were out on the Clackamas River. I've been boating in some form most of my adult life. I'm certainly not an expert paddler, more of a class 3, 4. whitewater. I've done lots of river rafting, self-guided trips, but more of a jack of all trades, master of none sort of person. Use my skills to make wilderness backcountry trips, backpacking, pack rafting, combinations of, you know, bike, hiker, and or pack raft.
Yeah, the pack rafting trips look amazing up there. I want to go.
They are. You should come.
Right, and the third one of our speakers is Dana Benton. She's on her phone.
Teresa.
And Dana lives in my immediate area. She's living in the Columbia River Gorge now, and I, of course, met her on the river. But she grew up in Alaska, having what she calls type 2 fun in the cold and with the bears. And, and she has a lot to teach us tonight as well. Would you like to say hello?
Yeah, I met Teresa on a pre-season Selway trip, which was a really, really good time. And I grew up in Southeast Alaska, where it is cold, mostly wet, cold for most of the year, and did a lot of outdoor things up there of all types. And lately, I kayak as much as I possibly can.
Which is wonderful.
And the reason I'm in my car is we're driving to the Smith River right now.
Oh yes, you're going to the, what's it called? The Smith River Festival?
Boatsmith.
Boatsmith. The Boatsmith Festival. I wish, I've never been. So I have a bit of a presentation. I have a bunch of slides, and so I'm going to be doing the screen share. And my speakers, just go ahead and chime in whenever you want. And I will get this thing started. Let's see. All right, can you guys see it?
Boating in the cold.
Boating in the cold. That's what I changed the title to, because it's not really about winter. And here's our people. Dana in the front, Susan in her pilot outfit, Dan dressed out for the New England chill. And that's me in front of a flooding Wilson River. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. The very first thing is going to be a poll, which Will, if you can get that poll pulled up, that would be terrific. Hypothermia, we're going to talk a bit about risk management. We're going to show our kits and so on. So cold concepts, there's only one question. I just want to get a sense of how many of you have heard of these things or know a little bit about them. And I'm not going to answer because I know a little bit about all of them. We'll give it like 1 minute for everybody to click a few. You click as many as are correct and then hit submit.
Oh, Jesus. I have heard about these cold concepts.
Have you heard about them all? I can't even click them when I'm doing the screen share.
Well, I kind of understand that happened.
Okay, well, hopefully. Okay, good. After about a minute, then let the person.
Yeah, that's right. That's it, yeah, that's right.
Quiet.
Well, while Will's figuring out how to make the percentages show up, I want to point your attention to that last line on this page, the cold curiosities. We have one panel member that has Raynaud's. I have recently had a friend experience laryngospasm, which is a pretty frightening thing. And I've been studying up on this stuff called brown fat, which is one way that we can help keep ourselves warm.
I've never heard Reynolds called a curiosity before, but I guess that's a reasonable.
It's one of those things because nobody really knows why, you know, like it appears at random times when it doesn't make sense. Is it not working?
Showing up on the screen, but I don't know how it should.
Okay, we'll just make it go
It's
away
only
then.
Question 1 so far.
Okay, I'm gonna go help. Ta-da! Oh, looks like almost everybody, well, everybody knows about hypothermia. That's not a surprise. We're Zoom rookies, you guys. Please forgive us. I'm trying to make it go away. Is the poll still showing on your screen?
I think everybody has to do that, close it out individually for themselves.
Okay.
Oh,
All right. So the problem with cold is that it's dangerous.
It is dangerous. I mean, people think it's just uncomfortable because it's, you know, cold, being cold is unpleasant, but it really can be dangerous if you lack the ability to get warm or stay warm and dry.
Yeah. This photograph of Will, this is standing in front of our house and he can just go inside if he wants to get warm and dry. But that's not always an option. This is a little review of the basic physics of heat transfer. The main three ways that we gain or lose heat are convection, radiation, and conduction. Convection is from when air or water is moving, and so you warm up what's by your skin and then it moves away and you've lost that heat. Conduction is when you're sitting on a cold rock and your butt gets cold because the heat from your butt goes into the rock. And radiation is what we get from the sun or the stove. And then over on the right, you'll see there's a couple more. What is it? Evaporative cooling. I can't even see that side of my own screen. And respiration is when you breathe and you're breathing out warm air. So that's really convection, right?
Sorry.
Another version of
I
convection.
love you.
All right, hypothermia, quick review. Everybody knows something about this, but we don't all know everything. It happens all the time. This day we had it happen. We were all a little bit hypothermic because we launched in the snow and we wouldn't have launched on that day except for the human factor issue that we had a friend who only had a 4-day window to do this trip. And so we launched in spite of the cold. And the poor guy hand paddling really was cold. I feel for him. But broadly speaking, 95 degrees Fahrenheit or less for your core body temperature, you're hypothermic. Mild hypothermia, you may not even be shivering yet, but you're starting to feel a little chilled. But when you get to moderate hypothermia, you've already had the shivers and you're starting to get cold enough to not be able to function well.
Teresa, so I have an interesting self-gauge on that mild to moderate hypothermia. When I put my hand together, you just try to make a flat hand. My pinky finger will not join the others voluntarily when I get cold. When I get moderately hypothermic, my ring finger will not join the other fingers. I can't get that to go in. I have to physically pull it in with the other hand. That's actually an interesting, I find a very helpful little gauge of my own. It's really my own little internal temperature gauge. Can I put my pinky finger in with the rest of the fingers? No, it won't go in. That means I'm getting cold. I need to start being careful. So that's just It
Yeah,
actually is more effective for me than the shivering.
that's terrific. Yeah, I've never heard that before. I know
Do
we.
you- when you're
we've all-
closing your fist, or what is it that you're doing with your hand?
So imagine a flat hand, like you're going to give someone a high five. So your fingers are all straight. But
Okay.
the pinky finger, I can't hold the pinky finger in next to the ring finger on its own. I have to pull it in with my other hand. If I get colder, I can't even bring the ring finger in. And so, sort of like the Spock thing, except I can't bring those fingers in.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. Yeah. So you guys all know the feed 'em and beat 'em strategy, right? When your whole crew is getting a little bit cold, you stop for a snack and you do jumping jacks or whatever you got to do. Run around, play a game, play hacky sack. Carry a hacky sack sometimes because it's a great way to get people warmed up. One time when I was a kid paddling on the Nantahala River, which is in North Carolina, but it's very cold, I was in my first boat. This is my second boat in the picture here. I was in my first boat and I flipped over peeling out from the put-in and swam like 100 yards of the Nantahala. And then they put me back in my boat and I went down to the top of the first rapid and flipped over and swam that whole rapid, Patton's Run, from the top. And then they put me back in my boat. And by that time, I wasn't swimming anymore. I was in the crucifix position. I was floating downstream like this and not swimming anymore. I was done. I didn't care if I went to the ocean. I felt fine. I wasn't cold. Everything was fine. I was indifferent to the fact that I might die. So that's moderate hypothermia. You can be pretty non-functional if you're just moderately hypothermic. There is some lag time between when a person goes for a swim and when the cold hits them. So sometimes they'll go for a swim, they'll seem okay, and then minutes or even hours later, the cold from their extremities gets back to their core and they become non-functional. And there's the same amount of lag time when you like put somebody in a warm sleeping bag with another warm person and trying to warm them up. It takes a while for that warmth to make it to their core. So definitely be aware of how slowly it takes, how long it takes for a person to cool off or to warm up. And then this point here about the carbs, I once did a salt river trip where I was on a low carb diet. I thought I was going to be super healthy on this trip and I was just going to keep going with my low carb diet. And I was cold the whole time. And someone noticed what I was eating and not eating. And they're like, the reason why you're cold is that you're not eating any carbs. Here, have a cookie. And I started eating cookies and I warmed right up. So carbs are important for keeping warm. Severe hypothermia is another matter, and extreme hypothermia is what we're talking about when a person's been in ice water for a long time. Severe hypothermia, you basically are not functional at all and someone has to save you. And then extreme hypothermia, you need to go to the hospital for sure. Like you're not gonna be well if they just try and warm you up. If they just drop you in a hot tub after you've had extreme hypothermia, you'll probably die. And then you guys know about this saying, they're not dead until they're warm and dead. Has anybody else heard that? Have I lost the whole audience? I can't tell.
Heard it.
That's a standard line in wilderness EMT language.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading about it and this bit about the pupils being fixed and dilated. You know, if the pupils don't change at all when you shine a bright light in them, they're probably not alive. But do you really trust yourself to make that decision? Because if you made the wrong decision and called them dead when they weren't dead, then you would be killing them. So of course, you're going to assume that it's possible that they could be resuscitated and always get them back to advanced medical care where they can get rewarmed. And when somebody is that cold, they have to be treated very gently, because if you bounce them around or try and rewarm them too quickly, it can cause a heart attack. So they might seem dead, but they could be alive. If you look at this second bullet point, humans can survive the coldest ever known was a core temperature of 57, and that's really cold for a human. And 7 hours of a heart not beating, and this person came back to life. Frogs can be frozen for months at a time, so it's pretty cool. Hey, Dan, talk to us about reperfusion injury.
That's one of the, I think, one of the more fascinating ones, when your core is still a little bit warm, not warm enough, but your extremities are even colder. You know, when you just have those icy fingers, icy hands, and the instinct is to get warm as quick as possible. But by doing so, it starts to open up all the vasculature, and the cold blood from out in the hands and down in the feet comes back into the core. And just as the core is starting to feel like, okay, we're starting to warm up, we're getting up into that range where maybe we're going to survive, and it gets dumped on with all this cold blood from out in the extremities coming back into the heart, and it just sends the whole body back into its, I don't want to use the word cold shock because that's a very specific term, but essentially shocks the body back into a state of hypothermia, which is why when someone does get rewarmed from an extreme hypothermic situation, it has to be such a incredibly controlled environment. You don't do this out in the field. You say, as you say, someplace on here it says transport them cold. You get them to the emergency room still cold and let the emergency room warm them up, because they will probably, if you warm them up from an extreme hypothermic situation, that returning of the cold blood back to the core is just going to send them probably for their last loop. To get them back to the hospital cold and let the ER warm them.
Right. Use their ECMO
And
machine.
Kay, I see your question. What if you don't have easy access to the emergency room? That is a constant dilemma for wilderness medicine. When I was trained as an EMT years ago, wilderness EMT, and that was one of the constant dilemmas. What if you're days away? I mean, okay, we say, oh, you can survive hours in a severely hypothermic state. Yeah, but you can't survive days. And so when you, just in general, and not just with hypothermia, but just with in general, when you're days away from potential rescue, some of these rules have to get bent. I mean, you can't let someone stay cold for, wow, we're on day 3 of a 6-day trip. It's going to take us, 24 hours to get out. You can't leave them. You can't provide the same care that you would if you were a couple of hours from the ER. And I don't have a good answer for you there, other than, as it says, CPR. But it's pretty hard to do long-term CPR if someone is warming up, and that completely blows that first bullet point: gentle treatment. If you're truly hypothermic and you're out there for days, I mean, yes, you're going to end up having to rewarm. But understand that you will be putting them in a very, very dangerous situation, and that's something that has to be monitored so closely. And you just don't have the tools to handle it when they do crash. So I hope you're never in that situation. But
yeah,
wilderness. I mean, Susan, I'd be curious what you have to say, because you probably do more of the wilderness thing than anybody, and the bending of the rules when you're 3 or 4 days out is a challenge.
Yeah, sure. I have fortunately not had to deal with a traumatic injury or health condition like that in the wilderness, but we do always, well, and we get into this later with trip planning and risk management. We do always consider what our bailout options are, and what we're going to do, because you could be, you can be weathered in and no one can come get you for a week. So we always have to be prepared for what those contingencies are going to be.
let's try it. cold
Here we
is.
are.
Yeah. I like to ask this question: what loss are you willing to accept? You know, are you okay with losing a little toe, or you know, like, where do you draw the line? How cold is too cold? It's a personal choice, right? And then temperatures, you can look at weather predictions and you can get an idea what the temperatures will be. But the truth is that the wilderness environment is unpredictable, that it does things that weren't in the forecast. And so you have to be prepared for more than just what the prediction says. The duration of exposure, as in what you were just talking about, Susan and Dan, if you're going to be out there for 4 days, that's very different from a day trip. I mostly do day trips. And if you get a little bit cold, you just go home and jump in the hot tub. But if you're way out there, that's not an option. And when it's cold, sometimes you might decide to do an easier route, do an easier river, walk a rapid that you might have run normally, just because it's cold, and it reduces your latitude in terms of how much risk is involved with any choice that you have. You mentioned the ease of bailout. And what else would you guys say about assessment? What are you looking at when you try to figure out what to do about the situation?
Teresa, something that I do, and this is not just paddling, this I do in everything. If I'm out cutting wood with my chainsaw, or I'm going for a bike ride, or whatever, I always think of the ideal situation and then start ticking off points for, well, that's not ideal, and that's not ideal, and that's not ideal, but I'm still within my risk tolerance. I'm still okay. And at some point I feel it tip over the edge and I go, whoops, nope, I just crossed over the edge where I no longer feel safe. Whether it's, that's the rapids I always know, but darn it, there's a tree in it this year. Oh, okay, that just changed the situation. But with all of those points, I imagine tallying up the points of risk. If it's cold, I just kind of think of all those points as being doubled. If it's a warm, sunny day and there's a risk, well, I understand the risk. If it's a cold, nasty day, that risk is twice as much in my mind. Now, it's not that perfect of a thing, but cold just ratchets up all the risk whenever I'm doing risk assessment. It's across the board.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people
In aviation, we refer to that as the Swiss cheese model, where you're, you line up a bunch of slices of Swiss cheese that has holes in them. And so, like, one slice will block the hole from another slice. But if you get to the point where all the holes line up, that's where you're, we call it undesirable aircraft state, but this could be, undesirable, human state, when all of those things line up, when multiple decisions or factors line up, not in your favor.
Right. So I'm making a list, like, okay, we've got a paddler that we don't know. We've got one paddler that's maybe a little weak relative. We got one paddler that forgot their throw bag. We've got one paddler that forgot their helmet and had to borrow one, and it starts to add up. That's your Swiss cheese, right?
Yes, exactly. So, you might be willing to tolerate one or two of those holes, but when you start to get multiple holes and when they start to line up, then things go haywire. So that's the mitigation factors. And that's you just mentioned one of my considerations in trip planning is who your partners are, like weighing your skills and abilities against whatever the trip you're planning to do is, what what class of water it is, what challenges you face, and then knowing who your partners are. If you have capable partners, and that's an emphasis on capable, knowing that they're willing or they're able to handle whatever challenges are presented to you. Are they able to rescue you if you get in trouble? And it's like the group dynamics, like you always want to look at it's one thing to take, one beginner down a river. And then when I'm a beginner paddler, I always wanted to be with people who were better than me. And if I was leading a group down a river, I wanted to have a desirable ratio of experienced paddlers to inexperienced paddlers.
Mhm. Super important. This all jives with the trip planning stuff too. We talked about reducing challenge. But Susan, what you were saying about the crew, like who you're going with and how well do you know them?
Right.
I think that is probably the very most important variable when it comes to risk assessment, cold or no cold.
Right.
The people matter the most.
Right. Well, it's a factor in, the more challenging your trip, the more assurance you want to be of who your trip partners are.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think a very important piece of that also, as we said, is not just the skill. I could know that I'm with an expert paddler, but if I'm with my friend, the expert paddler, or a stranger, the expert paddler, okay, I'm so glad I'm with an expert paddler, even if he's a stranger, but I'm going to be better off with my friend because they know my tendencies. They know my strengths and my weaknesses. I know their strengths and weaknesses. And there may be a little, just that camaraderie of, I'm not feeling comfortable with this rapids. Cool, I'll help you carry your boat. Of course, I do that for a total stranger as well. But it's easier to have that comfortable interaction with the people that you know, and therefore catch the risk before it becomes problematic.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on this slide, I wanted to talk about the 100-degree rule. Do you guys know the 100-degree rule? This is something I grew up with. The rule is if the temperature of the water in Fahrenheit plus the temperature of the air in Fahrenheit is over 100, it's okay to go. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. And some would say it would be okay to go without a wetsuit. But if the water is 32 and the air is 78, or 68? Yeah, anyway, it's still not very warm, and it's definitely not warm enough to go without a wetsuit. So for the folks that still might be trying to use the 100-degree rule, I would say it's a bad rule and that we should let go of that one.
I honestly always used 125 for a wetsuit. At 100, God, I'm going to be in a dry suit for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. And this last line about the go and no-go parameters, everything you do when you're getting ready to do a trip and you're planning it, you're figuring out who you're going to go with, what the water level is, what the weather's going to be like, where you're going to camp, whatever it is that you need to figure out. You need to have a realistic assessment of when it's too cold or when the water is too high or when the right people are not there. And that becomes your parameters for not going. I will go if it falls within this set of parameters. And that way you have a firm set of rules that you have thought about ahead of time. And it allows you to avoid going on trips that turn out badly.
Teresa, I'd like to address
Absolutely.
Riley just threw in a comment, which I think is a great thing to address. What is the number for a dry suit? And I think what I would say to that is there isn't a set number. It's going to depend so much. I mean, honestly, I paddled in 30-degree water on a 30-degree day without a dry suit, but I was in a 17-foot canoe on flat water.
Mm-hmm.
If I had been in whitewater, it would have been a very different thing. If I would have been in challenging whitewater, it would have been a very different thing. And so that's what I think that just kind of concrete, at this number, do this, at that number, do that, doesn't quite work. It's okay, it's getting colder. Therefore, all of the other factors become more significant. The difficulty of the water becomes more of an issue if it's 50 degrees out with 50-degree water, but it's even more of an issue if it's 40 and 40. So I hesitate to try to put a specific number on it and just recognize your risk factors increase as the water gets colder, as the air gets colder, and add that into the whole pile of the go, no-go parameters.
Well,
that
and
thing
Dan,
that might not. Hmm?
as I'm listening to you talk about going on a 30-degree day with 30-degree water and no dry suit, you know, you could get away with that, but a lot of people can't, even on flat water. So
Yep.
it's so many variables.
Yeah, but
Yep.
let's be clear. If you go into the water, it doesn't matter who you are, right? At 30-degree water, you don't have much time.
No, you have
That's
no
very
time.
true. That's
You've
very
already
true.
messed up.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because you've got gas reflex and everything else, even if you swim a lot, right? So I see people out and they're skilled paddlers and they're in flat water, but you know, you hit a log or a stump or screw up or whatever. I mean, you're dead, right? If you're not close to shore.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
going to get to cold
Yeah.
shock. Don't worry.
Yeah, believe me. Yes.
But here's the starter, right? Always wear your PFD. This is really Dana. Are you still here, Dana?
Yeah, I'm still here.
This is mostly your points. Talk to us.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, so alcohol can be a big factor with cold. It may also any type of drugs both tend to lower your temperature and make it more difficult to warm up, and can also impair judgment, which would be a factor to take into account with the risk assessment. You want to try to wear the clothes that you would want to have on your body if you were to swim. I think it's great to dress them. A lot of people don't like to do that. I figure if I get too hot, I can always roll upside down. If you're on a longer trip and you have dry suits, it's great to bring repair items. It's pretty simple to so it's great to just learn how to do that and bring that stuff so you can do it on the river. I've been on 5 Grand Canyon trips, and we often bring a couple of spare dry suits because people have blown out zippers or hung their dry suit next to the fire and it burnt. And for winter Grand Canyon trips especially, you just have to have a dry suit. I always have hand warmers for myself. I like to slip them into my wrist gasket. I have them right against the skin on the vein so that the hand warmers are warming up the blood as it's going into my hand. And then I have my pogies on, and that contains the heat. But then I always have extra hand warmers in a little dry bag in my boat in case somebody goes for a swim or it's just cold. You can just throw them inside your dry suit up against your neck or your armpits, and they can really make a big difference, and they don't take up very much room. Other heat sources, if somebody gets cold, would be bringing something to start a fire, having a thermos full of hot water, or maybe you have a jet boil and some tea bags so you can give that to somebody after they go for a swim. That would be more for a longer trip, or cuddling. I've been on a Grand Canyon trip where somebody went for a swim and we didn't realize that her suit was pretty leaky. That's another reminder to keep your suit in good condition, so that you don't end up with a very wet, dry suit. And so she went for a swim and got really cold over time, and nobody really realized it. She was maybe too embarrassed to say. She also started drinking. And by the evening, she was starting to behave pretty and wasn't was kind of acting drunk, but since she was drinking, it was a little hard to tell. And what we realized is that her dry suit had been leaking. She got wet. She didn't even take her dry suit off and change her clothes. And she got very, very cold. And this was on a winter Grand Canyon trip. And it became a lot harder to warm her up after she got that cold, which goes back to Teresa's point about the lag time, and then how much harder it is to warm somebody up after they've gotten really cold. So it's been my, I always now have the jet boil and hot hand warmers and snacks ready to go, easily accessible on those longer trips, so that I can just force somebody to do these things that can help them get warm. We'll even stop and have them get in the dry suit, change their clothes, even if they don't want to. Adrenaline might make you feel like you're warm. Sometimes you just have to force the person to do it, because like I said, trying to warm them up later can be so much more difficult. Food, like I said, snacks is really healthy. Those carbs and fatty, very handy. Carbs and fatty foods. It gives you the energy that you need to get your body moving, which can help warm you up. Having extra socks, gloves, mittens. I don't know what slinging means.
Slinging is when you swing your arms to get the blood to go out to your fingertips.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I always wear a skull cap because it makes my helmet fit better, but it makes a difference when I go upside down. Wintertime or no, I highly recommend. I also like to have the little side things for my helmet, little earmuffs. You can snap them in, snap them out. I just have those all the time because I like them on my ears. It can be good to have overnight gear, depending on what kind of trip you're on, such as a shelter pad, sleeping bag, Mylar bivy, maybe something small. If it's just a day trip, anything can be helpful. Even like garbage bags. Garbage bag can be a great shelter.
Awesome. Hey, next topic, winter kits. Anything else about mitigation for the rest of you guys?
Some of the notes that I had, we talked about your skill set versus the difficulty of the trip. Weather, which includes temperature, precipitation, and wind. What the current river levels and obstacles might be. Your familiarity with the trip. If you're doing something that you're familiar with and you know, that lowers the risk, whereas if it's something new that you've never been on before, that raises the risk. So those are just other things that I had in considering a trip and assessing risk. And so that combined with cold just adds more layers to the risk level and what you're willing to take on.
Yeah, very good.
And then and we talked about we touched on bailout, but we didn't really talk about understanding where you are and having a map if necessary, but knowing where you can get out. Are you close to roads or trails? Where are they? How are you going to get to them? Versus, if you're in the wilderness, where could you get picked up? On our trips, we've had trips where we're planning to go to point A and get picked up, but if we can't get there, where else can we get picked up? And we actually got picked up in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge at our Plan B pickup points. But we had that pre-planned, so we knew where to find it and take out there.
Right, which means you looked it up ahead of time. You looked at a map. You thought it through. You asked the what if questions.
Right. We had a map, and the pilot had given us the GPS coordinates, and we were about to pass that point, and we were assessing our ability to make it to our destination. And we encountered oak ice, which is another cold thing specific to the Arctic, but we're starting to encounter a lot of oak ice and decided that it may not be safe to continue on. And so we took out at that Plan B point.
Excellent point. And glad you made it out.
Yes.
So what do you guys carry when it's cold? Did you guys bring your dry bags to empty out for us?
I only brought a few things. I didn't bring my whole bag. I have a few things out.
I stopped the share so that we can show and tell.
I'm not going to be a great show and teller because, like you, Teresa, I'm mostly a short. I'm not even a full day trip kind of paddler these days. So my kit is pretty tiny. But what I have can maybe be a segue from the last topic to this one. Of all those things that Dana was talking about, and I agree with every single one of them, I think the one that is so frequently and easily overlooked to the real detriment of the paddler is the hands. People are like, I don't want something on my hands that messes up my paddle, it messes up my grip. Pogies are a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the thing that, again, the idea of all these little risks all get taken, or, kind of turn up the volume on all those risks when you can't use your hands. When your hands become clumsy, everything is worse. It's really hard to rescue someone when you can't use your fingers. It's really hard to open up your awesome carb snack out of the little package when you can't even use your fingers. And so
Yeah.
I really get to, if there's, when people are buying their stuff, to say, okay, I got to get all this gear, don't skimp on the gloves. Get really good gloves that you can feel like you can paddle in. And I don't mean to do a product placement endorsement here, but man, when I figured out glacier gloves, those ones that have the grip in them already and they're waterproof, neoprene, oh my God, those are my lifesaver in the cold. I don't care what you do, but wear good gloves, because if your fingers are functional, boy, you can do a lot of stuff. And if they're not, it just goes downhill fast.
That's a huge point, Dan. And that's something that I struggle with a lot with the Reynauds, is keeping my fingers warm. And I have to use mittens lots of times and not gloves, whether I'm biking or paddling, because I just struggle to keep my fingers warm enough to function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have, I'm one of the guilty ones. I just paddle with pogies all the time, and I don't carry gloves with me at all. But I can recall one time when I chased a boat down the Hood River for, a couple of miles in the snow. And by the end of it, I had to let go of the boat. I was like, I can't save this boat because I can't hold on to it. Yeah. So gloves and pogies really should both be in your kit for winter paddling.
Yeah, and if I'm on a multi-day trip, I have multiple pairs of gloves and mittens. It's something that always stays dry in case one pair gets wet. I have a dry pair. I might have thin ones for doing tasks that require dexterity. I'll have thicker ones for just staying warm. So I usually have an assortment of gloves and mittens.
Mm-hmm. This is a thing that's in my kit. I carry this all winter long. It is Gorilla Tape and a mini torch. See the flame?
Woohoo! Nice.
Yeah. So if you break a boat and it's raining and it's 40 degrees out, are you going to be able to get tape to stick? No, you're not. So, but if you have one of these, you can dry the boat, put the tape on, warm up the tape so it really sticks, rub it in with something hard, and you can make a patch that will make it for days. So a little torch and tape, great paddling gear. I've used it many times, very handy.
That would
have
saved me one of my, I would say that would have saved me one of my hypothermia experiences in Alaska.
and that's it, it doesn't weigh anything. It's totally worth bringing. Right. What else have you guys got that's really awesome to have?
My thing, everyone is asking, I saw a couple comments about the space blankets, and I carry a space bag. Having actually spent the night under a space blanket, I find them to be essentially worthless.
Yeah.
So this is a space bag. You can buy them. I'm pretty sure I got this at REI. And I highly recommend this 1,000 times over the blanket version, because you can get inside it. You won't have the gaps. And then like I told Teresa, my story of probably the closest I ever came to being hypothermic. I tried to get my space blanket out and it was ancient and it was all stuck together. And so I was peeling strips of it off and pasting them onto my body. So make sure that your bag or blanket is in functional, and you won't know until you open up and try to open it. So if it's more than 5 years old, just get a new one. You know, every few years, just replace it.
Or if you're going to use trash bags, you're going to need at least 2 to cover a person.
Yes.
But they make a nice poncho. Oh, here's another favorite thing. My piece of foam.
Really?
It's a sit-upon, right? Like, have you ever had to wait for 3 hours sitting on something cold? Yeah, sucks. So, little piece of foam. Mine like slides underneath the seat of my kayak, so I'm actually sitting on it all the time. But if I have to pull it out of the kayak in order to use it for something else, there it is.
My snacks.
Some of these.
I always
ahead,
have with my jet boil, so we can always pull. Oh, I'll let Dana go ahead. She's on the screen.
Go, Dana.
Okay. I'm just gonna say that some of these things you may not think you need it for yourself, but a lot of times you might end up needing it for somebody else. I always have like a snack in my dry suit for somebody who's getting hangry, because that'll mean they're more likely to stay warm. Sometimes I shove a warm hat down the front of my suit for later in case we get out or sitting around and it's cold. Somebody always bringing extra warm top and warm dry top, and that could be something that somebody else might need, which could be really helpful. One other random thing that I bring all year round, but especially in the winter, is earplugs, because it's a common phenomena that people getting cold water in their ear can get vertigo, and of course getting water in your ear can start growing over your ear. So I'll have some earplugs in the summer that have through pretty well, but in the winter, silicone earplugs that you just jam and cover up the hole completely, because any water that gets in there is cold and I am suddenly dizzy and I cannot roll very well. So that's it.
Okay, yeah, dizzy is not good. Huh. I didn't know that about the vertigo. Thank you for that.
I didn't either.
Yeah. Here's another one of my favorite things. It is chocolate covered espresso beans. If you ever go for a really long swim and you're like exhausted, this will fix you. Most of the time. It really helps.
We'll take a jet boil, and one of our favorite things to do as soon as we get into camp, or if you just need to pull over and make something hot, is miso soup, instant miso soup packets. I used to get these at Trader Joe's, but you can just get them at the regular grocery store, and they're really delicious and nourishing. I always carry some kind of a gel packet. And like Dana said, half the stuff I carry is not because I need it, but it's a result of having needed it for someone else at some point in the past. So I found gel packets, people who are just bonking, this can get energy into them, and sugar, which provides heat into them quickly if you're bonking. Same thing as emergency packets. You can add these to hot water and they'll heat you up as well as provide you a little energy boost and some nutrients.
Yeah, cool. And a spare paddle, super important. Like, okay, another confession, this is what I carry. Little neoprene swimming gloves. I can run some pretty good white water in these, but on a really cold day, I'll be really cold using these. So a spare paddle would be awesome to have as part of your winter kit. Like more important when the water's really cold than in the summer, right?
I want to touch on something. Oh, go ahead.
I'll be really quick, Dan.
Go ahead, Susan.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Jay just reminded me, we also usually carry bacon because bacon is salty and fatty and good for kind of reviving you if you're tired and cold.
And good for morale,
Yes.
along with butter.
Yeah.
All right, go.
But yeah, I want to touch on the theme of the idea of having that for other people. I think one of the most important things that to put in is saying, all right, Teresa, what are you carrying? All right, Susan, what are you carrying? Okay, here's what I'm carrying. And for one, you might get rid of redundancies. You say, wait, do we really need 3 saws? No, okay, we don't need to carry all those. But you'll also get a sense of, okay, you've got the miso, awesome. You've got the torch. I've got the extra gloves. You know, that communication. And then just constantly looking at people and seeing, are they hurting right now? Do I have something that's going to, you know, make a really good difference in their day? I can tell their hands are cold. I can tell they're bonking, and just be really ready to pull your stuff out and be Santa Claus on the river. You know, give it out to other people.
Totally, yeah. I just saw in the chat, Kate Klink says dishwashing gloves, like Playtex dishwashing gloves. Yeah, great to have. Great. And they're not that heavy.
And you know, even just like surgical latex gloves, it's amazing how warm. I mean, they're not going to keep you warm, but they're going to keep you from being totally awful. And, you know, they're just going to be a little bit cold. It's amazing just because of that. Back to your slide, like your second slide, the convection. If you have a layer between you and the water, even if that layer is super thin, it's not going to prevent the conduction, but it will prevent some of the convection heat loss.
Mhm.
Yeah, latex gloves are awesome, whether they're the dishwashing or just surgical.
Yeah. I'm going back to the screen share here. So I think we've gone through this list.
Yep.
And that. Emergency batteries in your headlamp. Oh, this is about checking your kit. We talked about changing out your emergency blanket, or I'm going to replace my emergency blanket with a bag on Susan's recommendation. But you need to go through the whole kit, unpack it, check it, make sure it's okay regularly, not just once a year, but several times a year. Just a picture from a day when we didn't expect it to be that cold and the guys are all in blue jeans. It was chilly. We were fine though, and our stoves worked. It wasn't so cold that the stoves didn't work. Okay, so are you guys ready to rip through the rest of these topics? This is the 4 phases that the human body goes through in a cold water immersion. And we were kind of approaching this subject earlier, but this is Dana's area of expertise because she used to teach cold water survival to fishermen up in Alaska. And she turned me on to this set of terms. And Dana, if you want to speak to this, please do.
So this is the overview. I think we could go into it a little bit more. Is that right, Teresa?
Yeah, we got a bunch more slides about it, but say as much as you want.
Okay. So the cold shock response is that initial gasp that you feel when you first hit the cold water, which could cause you to bring water into your lungs. Can you go back? Thanks. Cold incapacitation is where you start losing some of your motor function. That's what happens next. Hypothermia, you went pretty in depth on that. Post-rescue collapse is how people can tend to give up as rescue arrives. And these times vary due to your body type, whether you're wearing a dry suit or anything, PFD, how rough the water is, water temperature, etc.
Mm-hmm. So cold shock, the first one.
You want me to tell my story?
Yeah, tell your story.
Yeah, probably my one of my most formative experiences as a paddler was before I was even a paddler, doing a classic Wisconsin activity of polar bearing, going swimming in Lake Michigan on January 1st. And it was quite interesting. So you literally walk out onto the ice. Most people are drunk and covered in Vaseline, but you know, I was 10 years old, so I didn't have that. And walk out onto the ice, and then you step down into the water, which is 2-3 feet deep, no big deal. Got in, it was fine. okay, it was cold, but it was fine. But when I dropped myself down into the water, dunked my head under the water, the experience of cold shock was really, really fascinating in hindsight, because it just completely disabled me, and got the constriction of all the muscles around the chest. The chest wouldn't open. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't that I was suffocating, but just that kind of that kind of breathing and not taking a deep breath. And it was just really interesting. I mean, it taught me so much, how you can be in complete control and then completely lose all bodily functions so rapidly from the cold. And it is formulated how I dress for skiing and canoeing and kayaking for the last 40 some years, ever since that day. It's quite stunning. If you've never experienced that level of your body shutting down, not because of hypothermia, what Dana was saying, that first couple of minutes where your body just freaks out. It's still warm on the inside, but it's just freaking out and totally loses it. And it was really quite interesting. It really set the stage for how I think about cold in the future.
Absolutely. And one of our audience members was making the remark that, your expert canoeist self on a 30-degree day with 30-degree water and no dry suit, if you went in, that's what would happen to you, is cold shock.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so you're risking cold shock by not wearing a dry suit.
Right. And especially if your face and head go under, that really adds to the shock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else comment about that? I've definitely experienced it. I go, that's what happens to me. So here's the paradox for us paddlers. There have been and still are many rivers that the river is ice cold even when it's hot outside. And when you're paddling snowmelt runs, like in Colorado and the Rockies, it's July and the snowmelt comes down. Or you're in the Grand Canyon and the river is cold. You could have cold shock then, just because you're dressed for the warm desert temperatures. And if you go in that water, are you going to be able to function? Easy to be complacent, yes. So here's something I didn't know that I learned from looking into this. You can condition your body and your mind. One, if you know that this response is coming, if you know that your body is going to do this, then you can calm yourself down and minimize it a little bit mentally. But you also can, by immersing your body in cold water regularly, you can gain more control over your body's response. And then there's the list of preventative things. If you've got some fat on you, that helps. It's a good thing to be a little bit fat. It's a good thing to not panic. And if you can keep yourself from shivering, that's not bad. This bit about raising metabolism, we're going to get into brown fat later. But in general, some people are able to stay calm and stay warm better than others. And maybe it's worth looking into how to do that.
Quick question. Do you think it's good to prevent yourself from shivering? I was under the impression that helps you warm up, and that's the purpose of it.
It's I think situational. Like if you're in the water and shivering, you're increasing heat transfer. But if you're out of the water and shivering, then the muscular movement will generate some heat, and hopefully you won't lose it as fast if you're not in the water.
I would agree with that.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I would agree with that. Thank you.
Okay.
There was one interesting video that I saw quite a while ago, and I actually just tried to find it on YouTube. It's actually a Canadian weatherman who shows how to survive when you fall in the water, and he literally cut the hole in the ice and jumps in on camera. And the funny thing that he does when he first falls in, he says, okay, now you just stop and relax for about 30 seconds before you start figuring out how to rescue yourself. And I thought it was really interesting to avoid that panic. It's just like, okay, yeah, you're in the water. This sucks. But just calm down for 30 seconds before you start trying to do something to save yourself. Because when you start thrashing around and panicking in the water, again, that convection, that transmission of heat because you're moving around in the water, just relaxing for a little bit is actually helpful.
Interesting.
And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that jives with what I found here. Yeah. So assuming that we survive the cold shock, and then we go on to the next stage. So you ended up in the water and you haven't gotten out yet. You can get pretty cold, and that's cold incapacitation. When you lose your fine motor skills, you can't put your drain plug back in. You can't even swim very well, right? But the goal is to get out of the water as fast as you can. But how fast can you? Sometimes you can't get out. Sometimes the white water is continuous and you don't have any options. And then what do you do? This video at the end, I'm not going to play it now, but I'm hoping that you guys will all watch this video if you haven't seen it yet. It's pretty long. It's like 6 or 8 minutes long, and it's a video, headcam video of a paddler when a buddy of his swims a very long class 5 section of whitewater at high water, and he lives, but it's very educational. The commentary is about this whole quandary of continuous whitewater. You have to conserve your energy in order to be able to make your move when you get a chance. Right? If you're the one swimming, you have to stay calm, conserve energy, and then when you get a chance, save yourself, because it's really hard for someone in a kayak to pull you to shore in continuous whitewater. It's like almost impossible. Sorry.
Another thing to bring up with cold incapacitation is that you will start to swim more vertically than horizontally, and that's a pretty ineffective way to swim. So being aware when that starts to happen, that you are heading towards hypothermia, you'll want to help rescue yourself or keep an eye on others that are in that situation and get them warmed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do recommend you guys. Have you guys seen this video, the time Mike almost drowned? Dana?
I did not see it.
Okay, I'm not going to play it because it's long and we need to keep going, but I recommend.
Can you put the link in the chat, Teresa?
No, I can't, but someone else can. Well, maybe. Oh, phooey. Later, when I'm not screen sharing, I'll be able to.
Cool.
Okay. So here's the 4th stage, right? We started with cold shock, and then there's cold incapacitation, and then hypothermia sets in. There's that lag, and then you get hypothermic. And then the 4th stage out of the 4 that Dana taught us is the post-rescue collapse. And I didn't realize this was the fact, but apparently the Coast Guard has a lot of stories about people just up and dying right when the rescuers show up, which is really sad. Dana?
Yeah, so they do have stories where they are talking to the person in the water, the person is coherent, and then as they're just bringing him into the helicopter, they perish. And it's like your body just knows that the help is there and it stops fighting. There was a link that I sent you with a video. I don't know if you
It's on the next page. It's on the next page.
Where there's a woman who was open water swimming and she was swimming along just fine, but when she saw shore, she was in like 1 or 2 feet of water and she couldn't get out of the water. Somebody had to come and help her get out of the water because she saw that shore was there and her body just gave up.
Yeah. And actually the same thing happens at the end of the Mike almost drowning video. You know, he swims downriver in class 5 for 4 whole minutes. And then when he's finally in the eddy right by the shore, he can't even stand up. There's no way.
So I think the point of this is knowing that it's something that can happen to you. So you remain in fight mode if it's you that needs rescuing, and that you also keep aware of that potential if you are the rescuer. Maybe it's how you're talking to the person.
Yeah, it's really important just to know that when a person has had this kind of a cold experience, they're going to be depleted. They're going to need some recovery time. And you know, I don't think we're in whitewater situations. People are going to be in the river usually so long that they reach the collapse stage, but it does happen. It's just not common.
It happens when plan B is what's going on. If plan A happens, of course we're not, but you know, you get a pinned boat, you get a rescue situation. My most significant hypothermia situation that I've experienced, at least in the Southeast, was while doing a rescue. And I wouldn't have been cold in a boat, but it's that, oh shoot, we're no longer on plan A. We're spending a lot of time in the water.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. You were teaching a rescue clinic and being the person in the pinned boat.
I was in a pinned boat for about 15 minutes. And I was in a dry suit in a pinned boat in August in North Carolina. And at the end of the rescue, as all the students were debriefing how they had rescued me, they were all standing around in shorts. And I was in a dry suit, shivering to death, sipping hot chocolate, and it was 90 degrees in August. It was one of those situations where I think, oh, it's a beautiful day, but I was hypothermic because I had spent about 15 minutes with water flowing over me in the Nantahala, which is inherently cold.
Very. Yeah. So moving on, because we're already at an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm going to cut us off at an hour and a half. But the diving reflex, previously called the mammalian diving reflex, but now I've learned that it's found in all air-breathing vertebrates, anything with a skeleton, right? So it's a response that helps us survive when we're underwater. It slows down our metabolism, slows down our breathing and our heart, so that we can last longer underwater, right? And aquatic mammals are really good at it, like otters and dolphins. They can stay underwater a long time, very long time. Humans are better at it when we're young, and then we're not so good at it later on in life. And human children, though, can fall through the ice, sink to the bottom, stay down there a few hours, be pulled out, and be resuscitated and have no brain damage, be normal, which is just amazing. And the physiology of it, I have some notes about it here. It's the chilling and wetting of the nostrils and the face while you're holding your breath. So those things have to happen at the same time. And I was thinking about it, when we flip over in a kayak in cold water, our nostrils and face are underwater and we're holding our breath. So are we having a diving reflex just from flipping over? I don't know. But I can say that I, for one, kind of calm down when I'm in that situation, which is paradoxical. It slows your heart rate down. And if you look at the 4th bullet point from the top, the one that starts with more pronounced, 60% of the subjects in this one study had a biphasic response, which meant that their heart rate went up at first and then it went down. And they actually had, their heart rate went down more than the ones that did not have their heart rate go up at the beginning. And I don't know why that is, but it's interesting. I'm a doctor, so I'm interested in these things. And skin and scuba divers learn how to use this. And Will's reading that book about the rise of Superman, about the flow that I've talked about before. And there's one chapter in there where a lady learns how to use the diving reflex in order to go deeper than anyone has ever gone. before. And there's something about going deep underwater and the increased pressure that also affects our metabolism. So lots to learn here. I'm just skimming over the surface, but I'm very curious. Here's what happens in the diving reflex. The cold causes vasoconstriction, the shrinking of the blood vessels in your arms and legs, hands and feet, skin on the outside of your body. All the blood leaves that tissue and it goes to the core of your body. So it stays in your head and your chest and your abdomen inside. Your spleen, which is on the left side under your ribs, your spleen is this organ that filters red blood cells, but when you're having a diving reflex response, it actually squeezes out a bunch of red blood cells, and it like adds oxygen to your supply for your brain to keep it alive while you're underwater. Diuresis, people in this situation, I guess, have to pee. I don't know if divers do this. And one really interesting thing is that when the blood gets shunted from the periphery to the core, it actually prevents the lungs from collapsing, allowing you to dive deeper. And the final bullet point's the scary one. It causes irregularities in your heartbeat. So it can be strange rhythms or heart blocks. Most of them are apparently okay, but every now and then somebody will have one that's dangerous and they'll need to stop doing it, stop diving immediately. So on to the next random strange thing that has to do with cold, Raynaud's syndrome or Raynaud's disease. I know Susan has this, and I know some other paddlers that have it, and it really impacts your ability to withstand cold temperatures. You want to speak to it, Susan? Are you there? Okay. Well, anyway.
Hang on, sorry. I had muted myself.
Right.
Sure, I don't know as much as you do about it scientifically. I just know that for me, I've always had a tendency towards cold hands and feet. And I can't remember when I first started experiencing Raynaud's, probably when I still lived in Portland. But every year I've been up here, it gets more pronounced and more difficult to manage. And even on, it can be, a 60-degree day and I go hiking and I'm plenty warm. And as soon as I stop moving and sit down, the blood will drain out of my fingers. My fingertips will be white and my hands are cold. So I pretty much never go out without mittens and or hand warmers in my emergency kit. Unless it's a, super, like if I were in Phoenix in the summer, maybe, but it requires me just to pay extra attention to care of my feet and hands and how to keep them warm, and having a system to do that. And sometimes just having to stop and shove my hands in my pants to get my fingers warm.
I mean, the prevalence, I just looked this up today, 11% of white women in the US have Raynaud's at least once in their life, and 9% of men. That's a lot of people. I was surprised. But I've learned from a friend of mine who's an MD that there are vasodilators that you can take right before you go paddling that will increase the circulation to your fingers and reduce the chance that you'll have problems. So that would be worth investigating. Are we done with Raynaud's? Anything else to add, Susan, or anyone else?
Not that I can think of. What Dana said before about the hand warmers and actually positioning them over your veins, not necessarily in your hands themselves, but over where it touches the blood. When I'm biking, I'll put them on the top part of my hand where the separation of your finger and your thumb, there's that little blood vessel right there. Yep, on the web. Position between, like, just up from your wrist over that V, so it warms the blood going out to your thumb, which is by itself, as well as to your fingers.
Okay, this is kind of a minor detail, but if I might say it's what you really want to warm up is the arterial blood, the artery, because that's what's going out to the hand, and then the vein is the blood that's coming from the hand back into the body. and it's right next to the radius, the bone on this side of the hand. So
Okay, I'm gonna start trying that.
yep, so it's right there. What was Kay trying to say, Kay?
Yeah, can you repeat what you mentioned, something some people can take beforehand? I don't have it, but I have a lot of friends that do, so I'm curious.
Well, I don't know the name of the drug. I would say tell them to ask their doctor. And basically it's a vasodilator. And, you know, most of the drugs for erectile dysfunction are also vasodilators, but I'm not sure I would recommend the same drugs. So it would be an ask your doctor question.
They're female, so I don't think that would work, but.
Well, it might work on their hands instead of other parts. Okay, so laryngospasm, I promised I would talk about laryngospasm, but I haven't actually found that it's connected to cold. A friend of mine had one recently after being upside down in very cold water for a long time. And she came up looking bluish gray with her eyes bugging out and not able to breathe. And it turns out that laryngospasm is triggered by having fluids in your throat. And some people will have it triggered by a reflux, by like acid reflux. And it can also be triggered by trauma, by violence, like landing on your back, falling from a height. So there's lots of things, but basically it's your vocal cords going into a spasm and closing your throat. And this protects you from getting water in your lungs. So it's actually good if a person is, for example, having the diving reflex because they've fallen through the ice and they're under the ice. The laryngospasm will keep the water from going in even if they're unconscious. But if you're conscious and this happens to you, you're not going to be happy. So.
Can I make a comment, Teresa?
Yes, go.
I had that exact thing happen to me, not in a boating situation, but in a hospital. And what resulted was an almost fatal episode of something called flash edema, where because of the laryngospasm shutting off the airway to your lungs, the force of your body trying to get a breath pulls fluid into your lungs. And I went instantly, like in a matter of a minute or two, from lying on the recovery table to, as the nurse later told me, blue as a Smurf.
Oh,
and
bad.
The next thing I vaguely remembered them saying, stay with us, stay with us. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the intensive care unit with tubes hanging out of me all over the place. So that's something to consider about laryngospasm. I would think it would very possibly could happen if something shut your airway down like that with cold water, because your body is going to still try to breathe, especially if your head gets above water.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that, Dawn. This bit, it's hard to inhale, but the exhale is less impaired, seems to be fairly universal. And so you were trying so hard to inhale that it did that to your lungs. You had sudden edema.
Exactly.
In your
Yeah,
lungs.
just the force of the body trying to take the breath, just according to the doctor told me later, just filled my lungs with fluid in a matter of minutes.
Horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the wrong kind of croaking. I'm glad you didn't croak.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's fairly dark, so we'll go on to something a little more cheerful for our very last one, which is some people are better at raising their body temperature than other people. And the reason why could be brown fat. Sure, you can get active, move your muscles, that warms you up. You can eat carbs and that feeds your metabolism and that warms you up. But if you already have on your person a good supply of brown fat cells are a different kind of fat from white fat, which is the kind that we have mostly. Brown fat wastes heat. Instead of making ATP, which is like the cash energy currency of the body, it just makes heat. And bears have a lot of brown fat, which is how they keep warm when they're hibernating, because they're not moving, right? They're not eating. So they're just burning fat and it's generating heat. You can make yourself have more brown fat by cold conditioning. If you jump in cold water every day, your body will decide to make more brown fat because it thinks it has to. You can also encourage your brown fat proportion to increase by eating a high PUFA diet. PUFA is polyunsaturated fatty acids. So it's a certain kind of fats that encourage your body to make more brown fat. And it's mostly nut and seed oils. I eat a lot of peanut butter, so I like to think the peanut butter is making me have more brown fat. And the other thing that I found that makes people have more active brown fat, in other words, the brown fat makes more heat, is berberine. And berberine is in a lot of herbs that are used as medicine. Here we have one called Oregon grapefruit, which grows pretty much everywhere in the woods. And if you ever pull up one of those plants and look at the root, it'll be yellow under there's the outer bark and then there's the inner bark, and the inner bark is yellow. That's the berberine. So interesting stuff. That is it for our main presentation, but we're happy to take questions and comments. And we got the list of takeaways here. Always include cold in your risk assessment. We've had several comments about it doubling the risk of any given endeavor. Always wear your life jacket. And always wearing your life jacket is one of those things that applies for cold or not for cold. But it's really important when it's cold and you might have cold shock. That's when it's really important. You dress for a swim even when the air is hot. You check out your kit. You always test your gear before you go on a big trip. You always ask, what if plan A doesn't work? What if plan B doesn't work? You always consider the consequences. And maybe if you do all this long enough, you start having some successes. I think Dan had a success story.
Well, I never thought I would consider this particular kayaking experience a success. It was the first swim I had in about 15 years. Actually happened in November, just a few months ago. But it was one of those situations where I'd taken into account all of the different factors, and I talk about, theoretically having like a point system thing. What's checked off in a negative way on all of these different risk factors. And I ended up running a waterfall that I probably had the wrong boat for. And bottom line, I'm swimming at the bottom of the waterfall. This is one of those days where it's about 40 degrees out and the water is about 40 degrees. And after I got out of the boat and I'm swimming, I had this moment where I realized I'm okay. This kind of sucks, but I'm okay. Because I had everything prepared. I had my gloves on. I had my dry suit. I had my skull cap on. I had my equipment set up in such a way that I could handle it all while in that unfortunate situation. I might not have been as careful if it had been 90 degrees out and with 70-degree water or something like that. But because I had just taken all those precautions of the cold, here I am swimming to shore going, well, this is not plan A. This kind of sucks. Actually, I had some broken ribs. But nevertheless, the cold didn't bother me because I'd had all the preparation for it. And ultimately, got out. I didn't even lose my sandal. My sandal came off at first, but I managed to get it back too. But it was really interesting to have this culmination of many, many years of preparing for cold. And in probably one of the nastiest swims I've had in a long time, actually feel like I was going to be just fine because I had the right equipment on. So it was worth all the preparation.
Applause.
And the ribs healed.
Well done.
One more takeaway is keep an eye on your friends, because the sooner you deal with cold issues, the easier it'll be to deal with. Maybe it's just handing somebody a snack or giving them one of your pogies if you can deal without one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So true. Any questions from the audience or? Feel free to unmute yourselves if you need to say something. Someone asked if I was going to make a PDF of the presentation available, and I will. I'll post it on the LCCC page that this link came from. Lee Belknap says he stores his headlamp batteries outside the lamp to prevent damage if the batteries leak. That's advanced.
Teresa?
Yeah.
So Dan, I appreciate your answer to the, like, what do you do if you're not near anywhere? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you said, well, you don't know. What would you do? I mean, should you try to keep warming them up slowly, or? I mean,
that's my understanding from the EMT training that I've had is you do ultimately warm very slowly.
And hydrate.
It's just hydrate if they're warm enough to be functional and being able to take stuff in. I mean, that's obviously a danger when someone is on the edge of consciousness. But yeah, hydrating them and warming them very, very slowly is really the key. But boy, it's if they're really extremely hypothermic and you're not near advanced life support, it's going to be a very challenging situation. But yeah, I think the key is gentle and slow.
Thanks.
The reason why I say hydrate is because when you get really cold, you have cold diuresis, your blood vessels get smaller and you pee off the excess plasma. So you dump a bunch of water when you get cold, and you actually will feel warmer if you go ahead and pee when you have to pee and you're cold. But when you're warming up, you need a lot of water to fill your blood vessels back up again. And the warmer the water is that you take in, the easier it is, because it's going to help rewarm your whole body. So drinking warm liquids is really a wonderful way to treat a person that's up to moderate, on the verge of severe. But once they're past severe and into extreme, they have to go to the hospital.
Right.
And that severe zone is the in-between zone where you might try to rewarm them in the wilds if you didn't have a good option otherwise, but it's dicey.
Thinking of sailing when you're out somewhere and you have a bad accident, like, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think we pretty much covered it. So if there aren't any more questions, I just want to say thank you so much to my wonderful panel, Dana Benton and Susan Sherman and Dan House. Thank you so much for coming and offering your stories and your experience. And if you all are not members of the Canoe Club, I know these safety series are free and open to the public, but you can still join the Canoe Club. We don't mind. We've been gaining members all over the world since we started doing this Zoom thing. So we've got a lot of people from all over the place with us, and we welcome you all, and we appreciate the interest in safety. I had no idea there was going to be so much interest.
You got some great kudos on one of our local Facebook pages from one of our local paddling safety advocates up here. He specifically mentioned your name, so thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, safety is such an important project. And I mean, when I moved all the way out here to the West Coast, I didn't really understand that the paddling world seemed like it was like maybe 10 to 20 years behind the East in terms of sort of cultural development. And safety awareness, it seemed to me, was a little behind too. So that's why I got so serious about it. Yeah. But we're doing it. We're raising awareness. Thank you for doing it. And have a wonderful evening. And you're welcome, people. Yeah, we're keeping warm. Bye.
Good night, y'all.
Bye, everybody. Hi, Mari.